Good morning. My name is Bill Shemidas. I'm Dean of the Nicholas School of the Environment, and I welcome you today on a very, very historic and joyous occasion. You know, as Dean of a school at Duke University, indeed, for a university, there are many, many, many good days. There are some, shall we say, not so good days. And there are a few really, really special great days. And today is one of those great days as we break ground on the new Orrin Pilkey Marine Sciences and Conservation Genetics Center. And this is an appropriate time to applaud. You did that quite well. I'm very impressed. So before we begin the program, let me mention some special guests that deserve recognition. First of all, President Richard Broadhead is with us, and he'll be speaking soon. Dick's vision of a university that has knowledge in the service of society is something that has really, really inspired all of us at Duke, and especially in the Nicholas School and the Marine Lab, and we are very, very fortunate and grateful for his support for our program. Also with us today are our lead donors, Kristian Parker of the Oak Foundation, and Flip and Kathy Froelich. Flip, you shouldn't be applauding yourself. Also here is the director of the Marine Lab, Cindy Van Dover. Dan Richoff. And Orrin Pilkey. And you'll be hearing from all of those folks in just a few minutes. Let me recognize a few people that are also with us today, and you can hold your applause. Blake Sullivan, who is the new chairman of the Nicholas School Board of Visitors. Lee Baker, who is the Dean of Academic Affairs. Thank you so much. I knew that. I knew it was the Dean of something. Dean of Academic Affairs. We have, in no particular order, we have Keith Whitfield, who's the Vice President for Academic Affairs at Duke University. Miles Stempen, who is the Executive Director of Carteret County's Economic Development Commission. Dan Bodden is here, who is Director of the Center for Marine Sciences, the University of California, University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And let's have an applause for our friends at UNC Wilmington. Rick Ludick, who is Director of the Center for the Study of Natural Hazards and Disasters from UNC Chapel Hill. And let's have a special round of applause for our friends at UNC Chapel Hill. And I also believe we have with us Peter Gluck, who's the architect for our new building. Hey, Peter. And we also have another friend from the community, Patrick Kenny, who's the superintendent for the National Park Service, the Cape Lookout National Seashore. Hey, Patrick. Who I think has just joined us about 10 days ago, and he said he was managing the National Seashore at Colorado before that. So I apologize if I missed anyone. So some of you had the opportunity to be with us yesterday and go out on the boat and see some of the great things that we have going on, the research and so forth in labs that we already have at the Marine Lab. And unfortunately I missed it, but I hear from folks that Cindy Van Dover and the folks here at the Marine Lab did just a great job on that. Today, as we break ground, we celebrate the philanthropic spirit that made life at Duke, life at the Duke Marine Lab possible, and also this new building. In addition to the Oak Foundation and the Froelichs, more than 150 friends of the Marine Lab helped us reach our campaign goal to make this new building possible, and we are very, very grateful for their support. I would also like to make mention of some of the other special donors for the building. They include Fred and Alice Stanback, Jeff and Kerry Chandler, Randy and Sally Christine Repass, Michael and Nancy Burgermeister, Family Fund, and Marshall Field. Thank you so much for your help in making this possible. And I'm proud to report that just 2 weeks ago, we were able to reach our campaign goal of $6.7 million to make this building possible. So thank you all for your help. And I know that even though you weren't mentioned, many of you helped make that campaign goal possible, and I thank you very much for your help in making that happen. And so it's now my honor to introduce President Dick Broadhead, who will be making some remarks.
only noticed the stairs after I failed to use them. And before I say anything, I will just comment on the fact that I was told today's dress code was beach casual. So I do have my bathing suit in the car, and with the slightest provocation, I will go and put it on. I am, as you know, the president of Duke, but I'm also a professor of literature, and I thought I would begin with a quote from literature, from the most beautiful book about the sea, the most beautiful poem about the ocean. This is from the 58th chapter of Moby Dick. You remember the line, "Though we know the sea to be an everlasting terra incognita, so that Columbus sailed over numberless unknown world to discover his one superficial western one." The idea that right behind me we have the beginning of the true terra incognita, the unknown world. And of course that's still true, but it's not as true as it perhaps once was, because although we don't yet understand everything about the ocean and the ocean world, the knowledge has advanced in important ways, and Duke has been lucky to have a key role in that advancement. I find it striking. Duke became a university only about 1930. Duke Chapel was only opened in 1934, but this island became part of Duke in 1938, so that as a foundational part of our identity has been being a place that sets up the human mind to investigate and try to understand the nature of the things that happen in what Melville called the watery part of the world. So when I come down here, I love to come here. Well, who wouldn't? But when you come here, and you can just casually bop around and meet people who are learning what exactly the deep bottom of the ocean looks like, the smallest organisms and the largest, the nature of conservation practices, the choices among them, the nature of climate and what climate is doing and will be doing to coastlines. Just such a source of immense pride for me to think of all the typical avenues of inquiry and discovery that have been made by faculty at Duke. I salute you all. But of course, there's always been another thing about the Marine Lab, which is it has this funky, old-fashioned charm to it, right? But funky, old-fashioned charm is great for many things, but whether or not it is great for the leading edge of scientific research can be argued. And so it seems to me kind of fun that when you come down here, things have been added. I haven't been at Duke that long, but there wasn't a repast center when I first came. And to think that when I come back next time, this will not be a tent, but the site of the glorious building that is about to begin to be built for us. And what an exciting thing it is to think it will not just add new facilities for high-end science, but really create the facilities for forms of inquiry and discovery that really weren't even possible 20 years ago. If you think of conservation genetics, what this means is we will be able to build a space where the very latest techniques of understanding are able to be practiced by all those people who know and love the attempt to understand the watery part of the world. I add my thanks to Kristian Parker and the Oak Foundation, to everybody who made the match. That's a thrilling story how the match was made, and especially to the Frolics who've been such good friends. Bill Chimides, who's pushed this project along. Who else am I going to say? Peter Gluck, I'm going to love your building. You get up here and draw it for us, right? And I certainly should also mention Cindy Vandover, who's been such a great leader for this place and who brings such intelligence, such integrity, and just such incredible heart to the project. I look forward to the fact, that every building that's on this peninsula had a dedication and a groundbreaking once upon a time, but after the building is built, no one remembers things like that because now it is able to do what it was built for. So the day will come when we all come back here and we won't even remember there was a groundbreaking because the building will be there and the work will then go on. To all of you who have helped that work and who will be part of it in the future, you have Duke's gratitude and great salute. Cindy Vandover.
Thank you, President Broadhead. It is a real thrill to be here with all of you today to celebrate this event. It's formally initiating this investment in the future of marine science and conservation at Duke and the School of the Environment. It's a ceremony that recognizes the forward thinking and generosity of the community of scholars and friends who've come together to make this new building possible. And we thank you all for your generosity, your loyalty, and your wisdom. The ceremony also recognizes one of our faculty members, Orrin Pilkey, who is just a brilliant and beloved coastal geologist, and who has shared this island and the Barrier Island environment you see behind me with thousands of Duke students. And so that's just been a real thrill. It's wonderful to see this honor for you, Orrin. The vision for the Marine Science and Conservation Genetics Center arose half a dozen years ago from the desire to bring the tools of genetic research to Pivers Island and to bring them to bear on issues in the marine environment, as you heard, but also to engage our students with these issues and to expand the ability of the Marine Lab to attract and retain the finest scholars and students. The faculty in the School of the Environment in Marine Science and Conservation are international leaders, and they're celebrated for their interdisciplinary approaches to marine science, as you would expect from faculty at Duke University. Our fields of expertise have changed over the decades, so I know there's some alums in the audience here, and the Marine Lab began really with great strengths in larval biology and ecology of the blue crabs and the fisheries interactions out here. We now include marine mammal science and conservation, my own field, deep sea exploration, and ecology and management of the deep sea, the interaction of physicochemical processes and biology at macro and micro scales, and especially, this is, I think, one of the things that makes our marine program very, very special. We also study the economic, cultural, political, and social systems that are integral to coastal and ocean ecosystems, and our understanding of how to maintain and sustain those systems. Our faculty are in demand and are incredibly successful. They have lab groups as large as, I don't know, a dozen or more with undergraduates and graduate students and postdocs and technicians. And they collaborate with colleagues internationally and nationally, so they're very large and very active groups. And since the 1970s, most of these faculty have been housed in the 3-story Bookout building. So that's when the last research laboratory was built on this island. And we've kind of reached carrying capacity. We expanded, and now we've moved into the caretaker's cottage and have social science. It's now a social science cottage, but we were just hungry for more and really good quality research space. So we really welcome this chance. We have room now. We will have room to grow, and we hope to do so. The Pilkey Center will be a green building, as you would expect from Duke and a School of the Environment. It will be environmentally sensitive with features including geothermal heating and cooling, and it will house the modern research laboratories for 3 faculty and their associates. It will also have shared use equipment that can be available for the Marine Lab community at large. So we wanted this building not to be just only used by the faculty who are in it, but we wanted to make sure it had opportunities for lots of faculty to come through and students to come through and engage with the building and with each other. It will house offices for visiting scholars who are very important to enriching the life of the faculty and students here on this island. And it will have what we call a collisional commons, which is a space where we can run into each other in informal settings and interact. I hope you'll take time after this to go to the Repast Center, which is the new building right over to your right. And in the commons there are 3 easels with some images, renderings of the new building, as well as a really cool animation, fly-through animation that you can watch and see what this new space is going to be like. Duke invests in academic infrastructure in a coastal setting to place scientists and students beside the natural systems that we study. And one of the things I just wanted to talk about straight on is sea level rise and the fact that we are on an island in a coastal environment, and we expect to be vulnerable to inundation sometime in the next century or so. And we don't know exactly when that's going to happen or what's going to happen. There's a lot of error around those numbers. But what we did know is that Duke needs to be responsible and to think about building for and adapting to sea level rise. And so we use this new research building as an opportunity to explore design concepts that acknowledge and address sea level rise, and to use the building itself in its design as an educational tool for Duke students and for our surrounding coastal communities. So the solution we've chose chosen is to elevate the ground level, that's kind of an obvious one, and to design a building with research laboratories, all the expensive equipment located on the second floor. So effectively raising the height of the building where our gear is housed, the sensitive gear. We see Pirates Island, including this Pilkey Center, as a place of learning about marine science and conservation and adaptation to the changing environment. And we do expect many, many thousands of students and many, many human centuries of research to take place on this island before any sea level rise happens. As alumni of the Marine Laboratory know, the Marine Lab is far more than a collection of buildings and design features. And it's really about the community of people here. and our, this is, let me introduce our next speaker. Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Richoff, and I think you might be able to tell that Cindy's invested in this place. In fact, amazingly invested. And for those of you who have been here before, I suggest you walk around this facility. It hasn't been cleaned up for you. That's the way it is now. And we've gone from a third world research environment, yes we have, to a first world research environment. And even really old, cantankerous guys like myself and Dick Forward have been dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century. And we owe a lot of that to Cindy. And that's my introduction for me. Okay? Now, I want to thank Cindy. And if you look, we've got all sorts of investment. We've got the president and all these other people here, including the dean. And I want to thank them on behalf of the faculty for showing up. You don't know what it means to us to actually have you come down to the Marine Lab and support us. It's spectacular. Okay, now we actually plan here now, and one of the consequences of that is we know pretty well what kinds of infrastructure we need to move forward and meet the mission of the school and of our division. We're like a little tiny pixel of the university, but we're making it so we can do our part. This building and the generous donations from everyone, which I'd like to thank, is a consequence of that planning, and it means a huge piece of that infrastructure. This island is a puzzle. Every time you put up a new building, everything shifts and moves around. And we still have other goals that we need to meet, but this is a really huge part of those goals. Now, one of the things that's happened to me, I just sit on the periphery of things like this. I get to ask questions because I'm curious about how the world works. So I've been looking at buildings for about the last year. And like I look at IMS or UNC Wilmington, and I look at that building, and from the outside, it's very, very different from the inside. One of the things that Cindy's taught me is that if you're going to interface with the community, you better consider what the outside looks like, because that's their view. And as the world changes, and as Orrin's predictions come true, and as people need to be engaged with society, especially academics, we need to figure out how to do that. And this new building and its concepts are a good start for that. So if you think about the laboratory, we got Lisa, we've got stand-up comedians you would not believe. They're almost as good as Broadhead and Lang, the team. We've got all these different kinds of faculty and a community that needs to get along and learn about each other. And what I see for this building is the ability to improve that multidisciplinary communication on a day-to-day basis. So my goal for this place is a nice transition to the next generation. We've got an outrageously good new faculty. We have to figure out how to nurture them. I think this is one of the first steps in doing a good job of nurturing them. And I have nothing else to say. And it's time for me to introduce Kristian Parker, who's been asked to say a few words. Chris was a graduate student of mine. He was part of this community as an undergraduate and a graduate student. There used to be a building out here that blew into his research laboratory. He put the tiles back in the ceiling. He's been through a bunch of hurricanes, including a couple in my house where he had to clean up because I wasn't here. I was run away in Hong Kong. So, Chris, that's all I'm going to say about you, too. Come on up.
It's good to be back in Beaufort. Really good to see friendly faces. It's hard to believe that I graduated almost 12 years ago. I've been both a graduate student and an undergrad, like Dan explained here at the Marine Lab. I was an undergraduate in the spring of 1993. I did my independent study with Dan, and that's when it inspired me to come back and be a graduate student with Dan and do my Ph.D. Since I graduated, I have used what I learned here at the Marine Lab to become a philanthropist dedicated to the oceans. The Oak Foundation, my family's foundation, has an environmental program that has now been funding marine conservation for 14 years. What I've learned about conservation is that it isn't easy. There's not one path, one solution. That politicians are often difficult to convince. They have trouble seeing the value of the oceans as one of our most precious assets. But it is people here at the Marine Lab, the community of the Marine Lab, people like Dan, like Mike Orbach, Larry Crowder, Dick Forward, Orrin Pilkey, Andy Reed, my fellow graduate students when I was here, who set me on this path to become a philanthropist focused on the oceans. So I'm back here at the Marine Lab to celebrate this, the construction of this new lab. And our support is a way for me to say thank you, especially to Dan, my advisor, for believing in me. And, but it's also a way for Oak to invest in the future of the oceans. So thank you.
Thank you, Kristian. It's my honor to introduce Flip and Kathy Froelich. But before you guys come up, let me say a few words. So I met Flip and Kathy some 20-plus years ago. I was at Georgia Tech, and they joined Georgia Tech, and they became very, very close friends of my wife Bonnie and mine, and have remained close friends. They are both great scholars in their own rights, teachers, and great human beings. One of the great joys when I became dean of the Nicholas School of the Environment, and I started going through the list of donors for the Nicholas School and the Marine Lab, I discovered that they were, you know, friends of the Marine Lab. And the even greater joy I found was that after I became dean, they continued to support the Marine Lab. So that was pretty good. And of course, when they found out about this new project for this Marine Sciences and Conservation Center, they immediately stepped forward to provide one of the lead gifts that, along with Kristian Parker's gift from the Oak Foundation, really put us on course to get there. And it's a great, great joy for me to have them here, both as great friends, personal friends, and great friends of Duke University and the Nicholas School. And I hope they would both come up and say a few words. Okay, come on, Flip.
Thanks, Bill. It's always a delight and an honor to be back here, particularly to be the person who introduces the person who on this island, of course, needs absolutely no introduction. Of the one person who's famous up and down this coastline for coastal geology and for I guess I remember in the early days when we were arguing about what to do with the Hatteras Lighthouse, Orrin's famous piece. Remember the name of it? Let It Fall In. So those were my early days with Orrin, but I have to tell you some stories. There's so many apocryphal stories by Orrin. I have a whole brochure over there filled with them that will someday, of course, be published, anonymously probably. But I wish my mom and dad could be here, because my mom always gave Orrin credit for saving my life and saving my sanity. I was a struggling BS chemistry major at Duke, and at the end of my 4th year I realized I was not going to pass thermodynamics. And I pretty much dropped out. Actually, my mom and dad pulled me out, and I went to work for a year and discovered that working in the machine shop of my dad's auto dealership was probably not the way I wanted to spend the rest of my life. So a fellow by the name of Bob Mayer, who was music director in the Winston-Salem School District, suggested I just come back down to Duke and sit down with Orrin Pilkey, who was an oceanographer. I didn't know what oceanography was, and figure out if there was something I could do. So in the basement of, what was that building called? Where the old geology building.
Old art museum.
It was the art museum, the old art museum. I sat down in front of Orrin's desk, which was piled high. We used to call it stratigraphic piles, you know, books, papers, and in this canyon in between, I could see Orrin sitting back there, right? And we talked for about an hour, and he convinced me to come down to the Marine Lab that next summer and take the oceanography classes here, which would count in my curriculum. Chemical oceanography particularly, the chemistry department would accept. And that summer here was my rebirth. I give this island and this community the credit with being the womb of my scientific beginning. That summer, I got to know Orrin pretty well, and then the next fall, went back up to main campus, took thermodynamics, passed it this time, and worked in Orrin's lab for a while, working on some sediment cores that he had collected off the coast here. Taught me into going on a cruise with him on the eastward, which turned out to be a lot of fun. Went to sea with Unstein, Stephenson, and Blanton. They were the old faculty here. And learned how to teach myself to be an oceanographer. And then Orrin and Charlene and the whole family went off to Puerto Rico to do a sabbatical down there, and Orrin invited me to come along to work with him. Ended up staying there, getting a master's degree, and then going on and get a Ph.D. and launching a career in oceanography. So that's why my mom always gave Orrin credit for saving my life. Orrin is a prolific writer. He's a prolific talker. He's a prolific raconteur, and he's a prolific teacher. Over the years, I've gotten to know him off and on. We've crossed paths a couple of times. But when this building on this site became more than a gleam in the eye of Duke University, this vision, 2 islands away from the barrier islands, okay, so it's protected from the storm surge and protected somewhat from the hurricane winds. This site was, to me, an obvious choice for naming a building after Orrin Pilkey. He's been here for 50 years. 50, right? 1962? 64, okay, almost 50 years. That's an entire lifetime dedicated to this coastline. So I'm going to introduce him. He doesn't need to be introduced, but I've asked him to talk a little bit about the coastal zone, a little bit about the Marine Lab, to talk about Pivers Island, to talk a little bit about genetics. This will be a genetics building. There are 12 Pilkeys down here. And most important, to talk about 10 minutes. Orrin?
He didn't say a word about what I was supposed to talk about. Anyhow, I promised 3 or 4 minutes. Several years ago, I had a colleague, I guess he was a classmate, receive an award in the form of a very important award was named after him. And I was really pleased by that, but at the time I thought, oh my gosh, I hope he's not dead. And when it was announced, the name of the building was announced, I heard via the grapevine that a couple of my students called one another to find out if I was still alive. So, at any rate, my colleague is still alive, my former classmate, and I'm still alive, and I'm deeply honored by this award. Flip and Cassie, I'm so grateful to you. This living at a marine lab, one of the things I've become convinced about the importance of marine laboratories or living near the sea, living in the sea, living on the sea, is it gives you an intuition. It's not quantifiable, but it gives you an intuition for the environment you're studying that you can't get elsewhere. You live with the tide, you live with the wind, you live with the smells, you live with everything that's the sea, and it just becomes kind of part of you. It's really very exciting. To get on my soapbox very briefly, we all know that global climate change is upon us. Sea level rise, of course, is one of the big issues. But we also all know that our society, not just speaking of the U.S., but our society, the worldwide, is not really responding to this as yet. And so it's been my idea that we're not going to respond probably until we have some kind of global catastrophe of some kind. And I think the two most likely global catastrophes in the near future are in the marine environment. One, of course, is sea level rise, which is widely recognized. The other is ocean acidification. The ocean waters are becoming more acid, making it more difficult for critters to deposit calcium carbonate. And these are truly potential global catastrophes. And so that's why marine studies are so important, because we're in the forefront of warning society about these catastrophes. Of course, here at the lab we have, besides what I'm doing, we have people looking at the sociology of response to sea level rise. We're worrying about overfishing that's going on. We're worrying about changing ecosystems related to warming and so forth and so on. So it's extremely important, and this is, for me, I'm so honored to have this. To have this building named after me. So much. Thank you.
What a great day. Joyful tears. Joyful tears. Thank you so much. So what you've just seen is the wonderful circle of life, if you will, for a university. We started with the president of the university and the director of the lab, and then went and heard from the faculty, and then the donors, and then back to the faculty. And that circle between the administration and the faculty and the donors is what keeps us doing the great things that we can do. And of course, the part of the circle that we didn't hear from but is very, very important are our students. And I know we have some students out there, so let's have a round of applause for them as well. So very, very thankful and proud of everything that you do. So once again, thank you. Cindy, Belinda, and the team at the Marine Lab, you did a great, great job. This afternoon, this morning, and yesterday on this ceremony. Thank you so much. Let's have a round of applause for them. And join us as we now officially break ground on the Orrin Pilkey Marine Sciences and Conservation Genetics Center.
Enough for the digging. Break away. Enough for the digging. Okay, now the gig. Ready? How do we do it? We start with the tip out. Right. Cindy. Big Cindy. Yeah.